War. Nothing but the endless destruction of war. That is all Isseithey knows from the day he was born into a world taken over by war. All creatures choosing a side to survive. Fighting for control of the underworld was his main concern, even hating the enemy he had been killing since he began fighting. Devils were nothing but pests the fallen would kill, well, not all of them. Updated. January 22, 35 Chapter 1. War Chapter 1. War. This is going to be new story focused on an Isseithey who is a fallen angel. I was going to say more, but I would rather let you read. Talking. Thinking. Locations noises the underworld Grigori. Outside a meeting room in the military barracks of the Grigori stood a boy who looked to be in his late teens. The boy was wearing a black armored combat uniform with black military boots. His hair was mostly black like most fallen angels except he had red bangs in the front. Another contrast from the rest of his people was his distinctive red irises. No other fallen angel possessed similar eyes. His name was Isseithey, just Isseithey. He happened to be the son of the leader of the fallen angels Azazel. His mother was another fallen angel named Azza. Isseithey was waiting outside a meeting room. Right now the meeting inside was coming to an end. Isseithey kept leaning against the wall as other high-ranking fallen angels began to leave the room. He remained there until the person he was waiting for exited. The look on his face gave Isseithey most of what happened. "You look like shit, Dad," spoke Isseithey as he lifted his head up to face his father. Azazel looked back at Isseithey and gave a forced smile, the pain clearly still visible in his face. "I'm telling you, kid, if this war doesn't kill me, I'll do it myself. We already lost around 60% of our population. If this continues, then we'll have to pull out soon," Azazel said as he leaned up against the wall with his son while rubbing his head. That was right. They were in the middle of a war between the angels, fallen angels and devils. The meeting that had just occurred was a plan to launch an offensive against the devils. The number of losses to expect were exponential. Azazel and the other Cadre-class fallen angels were working hard to try and reduce that number as much as possible. "Try and relax for a second, we still have our leaders. If they remain, then we can still fight and keep up morale. Having our leader looking like he just seen death naked doesn't make our soldiers want to keep fighting." Isseithey spoke as he handed over a drink to his dad. Azazel grabbed the cup and chugged the drink violently. Isseithey raised an eyebrow to this display. "Calm down. That poor water. Try not to lose yourself now. I want to know what this offensive is about." "Shut up. The planning board is inside." Both men then walked into the room. On the wall opposite to the door stood a map of one of the many cities in the devil's side of the underworld. The marks on the map indicated the battle plan. Isseithey walked over to the board and examined the strategy. To his surprise, it was flawed. Isseithey kept looking as he noticed more and more problems with the attack plan. "Explain," spoke Isseithey, who was now narrowing his eyes as he looked at Azazel. Azazel sat down in one of the many chairs and leaned back. "We were going for a full-scale assault on the city north of the Devil capital. If we manage to take the city, then we can walk through the capital with little resistance. At least that is what we think will happen, since we got intel that the angels plan on attacking the capital directly. What do you think?" Isseithey looked back at the map and pointed to 8 different spots. Azazel looked up and raised an eyebrow. "What are you pointing at?" "The major areas of failure in this plan. For starters, the whole concept this is built on. If we do launch a full-scale attack on the city, then that leaves us vulnerable to anyone attacking the Grigori. Not to mention, if we do fail, then the counterattack will be devastating to our forces as a whole and will most likely result in the greatest number of casualties. The numbers could result in most of the remaining population dying. Now the most obvious part is that the ring of cities around the capital happen to be the most guarded and heavily defended areas in the devil side of the underworld." Isseithey then picked up a pen and circled the area towards the center of the front lines. "We don't have the necessary supplies to even support such an offensive if it bogs down and turns into a stalemate. The city itself has thousands of standing garrison soldiers along with millions within the 6 layers of defenses around the 6 cities that surrounds the capital. Since the war began, we've managed to break through 5 of the main layers of defenses. But the last layer is still heavily guarded. A direct attack would be met with our flanks being hit hard by enemy reinforcements that will arrive swiftly." Isseithey then walked over to the table and took a seat. One thing he hated was how bad some plans that the Cadres made. Azazel then planted his face onto the table. The amount of pressure that he had been receiving for a while now has taken a huge toll on him. The population at large was suffering. Isseithey had been on the front lines before. The fighting was intense. Isseithey was lucky to not be injured badly or maimed like some others he had seen. Sadly, it is too late. The offensive is live in 2 days. We only have a small window of opportunity. We don't have time to change anything majorly. For now, go train. Azazel then stood up and walked out the room. Isseithey stood there and watched as he left. A fair bit of anger came over him at that moment. "All right then," spoke Isseithey as he gritted his teeth. Isseithey then turned back to the map and sighed. He had a feeling that this would all end badly. The only thing he could do now was go back to training. "Training grounds, overhead," spoke Azazel as Isseithey swung his light sword towards his head. They had woken up early in the morning and began Isseithey's 18th intense training session. Each time one of these would start, Azazel would have Isseithey try to kill him. These would push Isseithey into breaking his limits. These sessions would last for 6 hours before either party gave out due to exhaustion or they had to be pulled apart by the cadres. Underneath. Isseithey then swung underneath. He then summoned many light spears above Azazel. Perish. Isseithey then threw the spears at Azazel. The red spears then flew at Azazel quickly. Azazel responded by throwing magic attacks to counter them. Explosions rang out as the training grounds became a red light show. Isseithey kept powering up and releasing his red aura. Azazel responded by flaring his aura as well. Both fallen angels stared each other down. Isseithey unfolded all 8 of his wings, each fully spread out. This display was familiar to Azazel. Isseithey had a habit of using his wings in combat. They both launched at each other, Isseithey waiting for the right chance. Once they were 1 foot apart, Isseithey turned off, catching Azazel by surprise when his wings began to cut into Azazel's shoulder. Once they were on opposite sides of the field, Azazel turned back to look at Isseithey. His wings were partially covered in blood. The feathers were red. Isseithey smirked. "I think that's enough for today, Dad. We need to rest now before we begin our offensive towards the Devil's capital." Isseithey then wiped off his feathers. The blood wouldn't be enough to stain them anyway. He just preferred that they remained clean. He had a right to. "All right, kid. You rest up while I go speak with the others." "Bye, Dad." Isseithey then walked out the room. He had won that time. It was tiring to say the least. Using his full power was still far from happening, but he could expect to end up fighting a very strong enemy. Azazel didn't want him fighting against the angels for some unknown reason. He didn't worry about that though. Isseithey kept walking towards his room. The crowded hallways didn't do him well either. He pushed his way past dozens of fallen angels until he was able to get to the plaza. In the plaza was dozens of guards and soldiers that were standing by. Isseithey kept walking past them until he eventually made it to his room. Luxury for the time period made it a valuable room. He had a large bed and other valuables around the room. He didn't mind it though. It was far better than sleeping in the barracks. In there it was crowded, and the grunts would always start fights with each other. Isseithey had to stay in there for months during his initial training. Those days saw him being pushed to his limits because of the idiots he stayed with. Damn it all to hell. Isseithey was angered. He didn't mind fighting against the devils, but this war was getting far too out of hand. Since he was born, he was trained to fight in a war that had been raging for years. One thing he would say was good because of the war is that his battalion he fights under, which also happened to be under Azazel. Isseithey continued to lay on his bed. Knock knock. Isseithey got up from his bed and walked over to the door. Once he got to the door, he opened it. The person on the other side smiled at him. Isseithey smiled back. It was his mother Azza. She had brought a basket of fruit with her. "Hello, mother," spoke Isseithey as he stepped out the room. His mother held the basket up higher and handed it to Isseithey. Isseithey took the basket and lowered it. "I heard about your training session with your father. You actually managed to wound him pretty badly. I immediately went to the orchards and picked some fruit for you. Sorry I could only find apples though," spoke his mother in an apologetic tone. His mother always apologized when she didn't have to. She was a more innocent soul. In fact, she was very different from the other fallen angels. His mother was a very nice person without any sin in her heart. Isseithey heard from one of his uncles that his mother fell from grace because she fell in love with Azazel during the earlier parts of the war. He didn't bother with the rest of the details because he could only assume what would happen next, and that wasn't an image he wanted to remember. "Thanks for the apples, mother, they were always my favorite." Isseith then took one out of the basket and bit into it. Crunch! Isseith tore the piece out of the apple and began chewing it. What was the commotion from the meeting room earlier? Everyone looked very distraught about what went on in there. His mother gained a small frown across her face. Isseith turned his head towards the door of his room. Isseith, what happened in there? Asked his mother once again. I'm not allowed to speak about what has been discussed, you'll have to ask Dad. Isseith didn't like that he had to keep his mother in the dark about certain things that occur in the Grigori. His mother nodded and quietly walked away. Isseith watched as she turned the corner. The look she had on her face made Isseith feel guilty. I'm sorry, Mom, but there's nothing I can do. I wonder if this will be the last time. I do get to enjoy laying out here, spoke Isseith as he laid down on a hill next to a tree. The spot he was in was a 10-minute walk from the Grigori, or a 1-minute fly. Isseith had went to the same spot since he was around 8 years old. It was always a place where he could focus his mind due to the everlasting silence that was there. This is where he was able to discover a special ability that he possesses. He hasn't told anyone about it since then. The calm before the storm, a hurricane of black feathers and limbs. Hee. There was a love of fighting that he gained since he had been participating in the war. Maybe that was his heart falling into sin, or it was just a side effect of the constant fighting he had been a part of. He was 17 now and had been fighting since he was 15. Azazel had put him in his battalion to keep him close and secure, something that bothered Isseith since he was able to fight people far stronger than himself. Commanding a unit wasn't something that was in his goals. Fighting as a part of a unit was more favorable. Although, claiming some glory for oneself was also tempting. Isseith laid there in that spot for seemed like hours, even falling asleep accidentally. He laid there for some time before he was abruptly awakened by an emergency siren. Isseith jumped up from his spot and looked towards the Grigori. He could see the swarms of devil soldiers attacking his home. Multiple high-power signatures were present around the battlefield, the mixture of elements complementing the chaos that was the Grigori. Shit. Isseith unfolded his wings and took off to the Grigori with haste. This was a complete surprise attack from the devils, but it didn't make any sense. The Grigori had many different layers of defensive magic spells. This would have been able to stop them from directly attacking it. No, that wouldn't make any sense. Those spells were made from multiple cadres hundreds of years ago. Then someone must have betrayed us. The only problem would be why though. Isseith focused on passing under the radar of the multiple battalions that were attacking the Grigori. Successfully doing so, he went to find someone. The panic inside the building was causing too many problems. People were being walked on and ran over as others were shoved into walls. The cadres that he could see tried to organize the populace as the others were busy fighting off the attackers. Isseith pushed through large hordes of fallen angels until he found himself outside his mother's room. Knocking on the door multiple times, he waited for a response. None came. "Mom, are you in there?" asked Isseith in a worried voice. He should have been on the front lines fighting instead of trying to find his mom. But something couldn't be right if he did that. His mom wasn't a fighter, she was a gentle person. If she were to be killed in combat, then Isseith wouldn't be able to sleep at all. Isseith banged on the door harder. He accidentally dented it due to him not controlling his power. "Isseith, what are you doing here?" asked a man with silver white hair and a purple beret. It was his uncle Shemazai. "I was looking for my mom. Do you know where she is? We sent her to the underground safe house along with the wounded. Azazel's executive order. Now come, we have to hold the line until the others can gather the army for a counterattack," spoke Shemazai as he and Isseith began rushing towards one of the exits. Once they arrived outside, they saw multiple cadres fighting against mass amounts of devils. "Follow me. We'll stand a better chance if we have each other's flanks. Don't hesitate to ask for assistance. We fallen have to stick together to survive." Isseith looked at Shemazai and nodded. Both men gained a serious expression before flying into the air. Isseith watched as they began to be surrounded by hundreds of devil soldiers. In the middle of them was a devil officer that was notably higher in power than the soldiers around him. The man wielded a black sword with an ancient inscription on the blade. "From days of old I had wished to fight against a cadre, and today I can see that realized," spoke the man. Isseith put his hand in front of Shemazai. It was a clear signal to him that he wanted to fight this one. "Oh, someone thinks that this will be easy. Well, I won't go down easily, boy." The man then summoned his demonic power through his palms. Isseithey smirked. Neither will I. Isseithey then launched himself at his opponent. Isseithey used his speed to get behind his opponent and summoned a red light spear. The devil quickly tried to block with his sword, both weapons clashing against each other in a struggle. Isseithey decided to handle the soldiers, easily annihilating them without breaking a sweat. When it came to power within the Grigori, he was one of the few to be known as strong as Azazel himself, even though he only possessed 10 wings. As he continued to take out the fodder, Isseithey was still battling against the devil officer. The officer swung his sword overhead, to which Isseithey side-stepped and countered with a clean stab into the officer's arm. "UHN," grunted the officer, the pain from Isseithey's light spear clearly having an effect on him. "Painful, yes?" asked Isseithey as he floated down to face the man. "What the hell? This burns more than they usually do." The officer dropped his sword in order to hold onto his wound, which was beginning to burn the surrounding flesh. Isseithey smirked, making sure his surroundings were clear before getting closer to the officer. "That's because the light I possess burns at a higher intensity. That makes it far more lethal than an ordinary light spear that the other fallen angels use." Isseithey then dissipated his light spear before summoning a sword of light which also radiated the same red aura that his spear released. "But my swords hurt worse." Isseithey then decapitated the officer with one clean slash from his sword of light. The devils under his command that hadn't been killed yet turned their focus on Isseithey. They quickly began to flee. Isseithey shook his head and chased after them, Isseithey following him in case he did something reckless. The devil soldiers didn't have time to react as they began to be cut apart by Isseithey's wings. Feathers and limbs began flying around as Isseithey kept up his assault. Isseithey watched the display as he began to contact the other cadres, the person he tried to get to being Azazel. After a few seconds he was able to establish a connection with him. "Isseithey, what's the situation on your side?" asked Azazel, who seemed to be in a situation of the tone of his voice. "Isseithey and have taken care of the assault force on the southwestern sector. What's yours?" "I'm with 2 other cadres. We're engaging multiple ultimate-class devils. Tamiel informed me that our forces are ready for the counterattack. We've already suffered a heavy loss to our garrison units. I want you in charge of the southern sector's defense. Oh, and try to not let Isseithey do anything reckless or his mother might kill me." "Don't worry, but from the look of things he can handle himself." Isseithey then flew down next to Isseithey, who was cleaning the blood off his wings. "He has a habit of losing himself in battle, that's what I'm worried about." "All right, Azazel. We'll meet up after the battle is over." Isseithey then cut his communication with Azazel. "What's the plan?" asked Isseithey, who had finished cleaning off his wings. "We hold the southern sector until Azazel calls for a counterattack. You're under my command until further notice," spoke Isseithey as a magic circle appeared from his hand. "All right," said Isseithey as he dissipated his light sword. The 2 of them then flew towards the southern sector, Isseithey having a battle-hungry grin on his face. Grigori Western Sector. Azazel had just ended his communication line with Isseithey. He looked forwards as hundreds of devil soldiers began to attack the front lines. Leading them were multiple ultimate-class devils, who they were wasn't in his interest to know. "Barakiel. We're going after the leaders. Their ranks will crumble afterwards. Once the lines fall to chaos, then we'll launch the counterattack." Barakiel nodded to Azazel's orders and began to order their forces to tactically retreat. "It's about time we get to actually have some fun. I've been looking forward to tearing more of them apart," excitedly spoke the other cadre who was with him. "Something is still bothering me though. We haven't spotted any of the Satans yet. Kokabiel, you're with me on this one, all right?" spoke Azazel, who was eyeing down the ultimate-class devils who began summoning a vast amount of demonic power into 3 magic circles. He and Kokabiel counter that by summoning defensive magic circles of their own. After a few more seconds, he devils launched a powerful mixture of attacks at 2. Both cadres not budging an inch from their spot. "Can I attack them now?" asked Kokabiel as the attack began to die down. "Wait for Barakiel to return before attacking. That way they can't try to do any flanking." Kokabiel nodded begrudgingly. Grigori Southern Sector. It was chaos. The southern sector's defense force was annihilated by the devil assault. Isseithey and Isseithey arrived to find what they would consider the main devil assault force. The other high-ranking fallen angels were being swarmed by devil soldiers and executed. Wings from both sides made the ground look black, the image making both men reel back slightly. In the center of the chaos were two devils. From what Isseith could tell, their power was around Satan class. Around them Isseith could tell that there were multiple high and ultimate class devils present. This put a frustrated look on Shemazai's face. Isseith, we can't fight them without reinforcements. Shemazai began summoning a communication circle. Isseith watched the devils closely as they continued to execute the fallen who had surrendered. This angered him greatly. He then tried to go out there and confront them. Shemazai immediately pulled him back before he could do anything stupid. "What the hell, let go of me," shouted Isseith as he tried to free himself from his uncle's grasp. "You'll die if you try to fight them now, it hurts me too to see them being killed. We can't confront them without being encircled ourselves. Wait until we have reinforcements," shouted his uncle. Isseith kept trying to break free until he eventually gave up, no matter how much it hurt him to do so. "Fine, but if something bad happens you're responsible." Isseith then turned back to face the devils. Soon after the communication got through. "Shemazai, what's going on? The southern sector has been annihilated. 2 devils of Satan class power and multiple high and ultimate class devils are with them. We need reinforcements before Isseith, and I can engage them. Damn it. Do what you can to prevent them from entering the building. Me, Kokabiel and Barakiel will try to get there once we're done over here. The other cadres are busy holding down the other sectors from similar forces." Alright. Shemazai now had steeled his nerves. "Isseith. We have to hold them off no matter what. I do not know when we will get reinforcements. Azazel trusts us to stop them from entering the interior, and we have to protect everyone inside. That is the job of the cadres and will be your job soon as well." Shemazai flew up into the air, catching the attention of the devils. Isseith looked towards the Grigori. The image of what would ensue if they didn't stop them now flashed through his mind. Stealing his nerves as well, Isseith flew into the sky next to Shemazai. Both men fully extended their wings, both parties staring each other down. The beginning of a major battle marking its start. And that is the end of the first chapter, and I have to say this was different from the storyboard I came up with originally. And I am not mad. The rest of what I planned will still be written to a point. Some parts one made were impossible to implement since the time period didn't match up. Anyway, I think that making a story that occurs during the Great War was a good idea and I went with it. I'm looking forward to the feedback for this, and I thank you for reading. Ch1 of 13 next, Chapter 2. Chaos Chapter 2. Chaos. Talking. Thinking. Locations, noises. Isseith and Shemazai looked down on the hundreds of devils that had decimated the southern sector, both releasing their auras in order to draw attention from the shattered defensive line. "I'll take the brown-haired man. His aura reeks of the sea. You should focus on the other, he seems more dangerous. The others will try and focus on me since I have less wings. But don't worry about that. I can handle multiple enemies at once, even if they are stronger than me." Isseith began intensifying his red aura, the light causing the majority of tension to be focused directly on him. Shemazai watched as Isseith began releasing a ghostly heat from his person, his wings being tinted slightly red from it. The devils that had been on the ground were flying into the air around the two fallen. The pressure of auras was being felt across multiple sectors of the Grigori. The devil that Isseith had picked flew up to face him. What shocked Isseith the most was that the devil possessed 12 wings. "It would be great to know whom I would be fighting against on this infamous day," spoke the devil. Isseith regained himself. His opponent was immensely powerful. Isseith then realized why his opponent's aura reeked of the sea. This was a descendant of a Satan. Isseith had to remain calm. "I am Isseith, he who pierces through the light of God." Isseith then expanded his wings out as his aura was beginning to reach its peak. His red aura was now shining a superior red. This caused some devils to turn away from the intensity of light that was radiating from Isseith. "I see why Father wanted to end your kind as soon as possible. If the fallen angels are capable of producing beings with special traits that use their power to a certain extent like this, then I can see why. I truly envy your kind, such a sin. We Leviathans are so, but my clan would rather have you all dead," finished the now known descendant of Leviathan. The realization of what was now going on was apparent to Isseith. "Shemazai. Yes. We are fucked. That we are, no going back now." Isseith and Shemazai stood back to back, putting all their trust into each other. And that began the start of the battle. Isseithey and Choosea both took towards the strongest devils in the enemy forces, the enemy force caught off guard by the direct assault. Isseithey went straight after the Leviathan with a light spear in his hand. The Leviathan responded by putting up a defensive magic circle. He then ordered his troops to attack. Isseithey saw this and aimed his spear forwards as he began to spin. Upon contact with the magic circle, Isseithey pierced right through it, much to the shock of the Leviathan. Isseithey then punched him right in the stomach, which sent the devil flying backwards. This angered the Leviathan, who began to summon large amounts of water, this forcing Isseithey to intervene against his opponent. Isseithey summoned another spear and aimed towards the Leviathan's magic circle. Before he could launch his attack, the devil army began to attack him, causing him to dissipate his spear. He summoned 2 swords of light and stopped the 2 devils who had attempted to flank him. Using his wings, he managed to stop the few that tried to from attacking him from the rear. Isseithey then quickly lowered one of his arms and used the momentum to cut through the devils around him, this causing the blood to go everywhere. Isseithey then turned his attention back to the Leviathan, his look intensifying as a large amount of water had begun to descend upon him, the pressure forcing him to the ground, yet the water vaporizing immediately upon reaching his aura. As the attack began to weaken, Isseithey stood up and summoned a light spear after throwing his swords into 2 oncoming devil soldiers. Isseithey immediately took back to the skies and began to clash with the Leviathan, both men preventing the other from landing attacks. As Isseithey was dealing with his fight, Choosea was dealing a different nightmare. His opponent was a member from the Lucifuge house. Choosea was impressed as he battled the devil, using the full extent of his powers to rain down light spears upon his enemies. He took a different approach than Isseithey, as he used distance to constantly rain down magic attacks. What grand power you cadres have, whilst falling to sin you still retain your holy abilities. We devils however created our own. The devil then launched an immense amount of demonic power at Choosea. Choosea quickly put up multiple barriers to defend himself, the attacks being halted upon contact. This however was a diversion for the weaker devils to launch surprise attacks on his flanks. Choosea immediately shielded himself with his wings. He was under heavy bombardment from all sides, but he began noticing something. Every few attacks a small gap of time would appear where there were no attacks. He decided to use this to his advantage. After waiting a few seconds, he shot out multiple light spears in all directions, these killing most of the devils around him in haste. The remaining soldiers responded by flying above him. Choosea saw it coming and used his defensive magic circles to redirect the attacks from the Lucifuge devil. This sent the attacks directly up, causing all who were in the area to get caught within in. The Lucifuge devil immediately stopped firing as he witnessed what he had done, this opportunity allowing Choosea to send a large volley of light spears his way. The Lucifuge almost being impaled, if not putting up a defense, moments before the spears reached him. "You made me kill my own men, you bastard." He quickly took to a higher position and began raining down even stronger attacks than before. Choosea dodged them. As he was doing so, he noticed how the devil soldiers began retreating from their positions. This gave him a little breathing space before he could develop a plan to fight against the Lucifuge devil. Isseithey on the other hand was having the time of his life as he began to slice through the devil soldiers who had launched attacks towards him, none making contact due to the sheer heat and holy power being released from his aura, which had acted as a barrier by nullifying the magic. The Leviathan had temporarily retreated as he directed him soldiers to attack Isseithey, this being a way to study Isseithey as he fought. Isseithey now being covered in the blood of his enemies as he kept dismembering them with a combination of his light swords and wings. Isseithey ducked under a swing meant for his head and retaliated by bringing his sword up and piercing through the devil's stomach. Leaning forward into his ear, Isseithey spoke. "Ash to ash, you will all burn." Isseithey then used his powers to incinerate the devil completely, this act shocking the remaining devil soldiers. Isseithey began laughing. He, ha 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 ha, this catching the attention of the Leviathan. "You send these amateurs against me so that you can watch me fight? For a Leviathan you are quite cowardly in my opinion." Isseithey's taunt infuriating the devil. "All forces retreat, I'll fight him alone," shouted the Leviathan. His men quickly began to retreat as he descended to the ground to face Isseithey. An intense stare down began between the two. The tension of the entire battlefield began to change as the Leviathan began to glow. Isseith jumped back to gain more distance from his opponent. The Leviathan's figure then began to grow into that of a sea serpent of mass scale. Isseith watched as the large serpent began to charge an attack from its mouth, the aura growing exponentially. Isseith began focusing the remaining amount of power into his wings, the aura radiating off them, scorching the area around him. Isseith then leaned slightly forward as he fixed his stance in order to launch himself upward, summoning two swords of light that also radiated the same amount of power his wings were. "I either stop you here or you surrender now. Make your choice, Leviathan," shouted out Isseith as the ground began to shake from the aura he was releasing. The Leviathan now increasing his power that was being focused into his mouth, the aura shining brilliantly before being launched directly at Isseith. Isseith launched himself upward directly at the attack. Spinning unbelievably quick, his figure appeared as a red circle. He used this to cut directly through the attack, splitting it in half so that it wouldn't hit the Grigori. Once he was able to get through the beam, Isseith cut through the side of the serpent's mouth, rendering its jaw useless as the beam stopped. The moment after Isseith cut through the serpents, it began transforming back into his normal form. This, however, wasn't a good thing as Isseith's red aura vanished. Isseith was now exhausted from burning through his power. This caused him to fall out the sky. Isseith ended up crashing into the ground badly, leaving a crater in his spot. The Leviathan then flew over to him, the devil bleeding intensely from the wound which stretched from the front of his mouth to his ear. The Leviathan then picked him up by the collar and brought him close to his face. Isseith, not having any energy left, was defenseless against his enemy. "You bastard! How dare you cut my face!" The Leviathan then threw Isseith onto the ground. "Urht." Isseith was now vulnerable. The Leviathan walked over and stomped his boot into Isseith's chest, causing the teen cry out in pain. "Keep crying. I'll fucking kill you for this," shouted the devil. He then moved his palm over Isseith's stomach and fired a magic attack. The blast carving right through his stomach, this caused Isseith to hurl up a large amount of blood. The Leviathan then aimed his hand directly at Isseith's face, a magic attack charging in his palm. Filthy creature. Before he could fire the attack, he was stopped by Azazel, who cut off his arm with a sword of light. The Leviathan reeled back in anguish as he was then stabbed through the back by Kokobai's light spear, his body being disintegrated by the lethal blow. Isseith watched on as they all landed near him, but he couldn't hear what they were saying. His wound was lethal, and he was bleeding out quickly. His vision began to blur as time went on. The last thing he saw was Azazel reaching for his head. Then his vision went black. Groaned Isseith as he began to awake from his sleep. There was pain coming from his abdomen. He began to open his eyes as he tried to wake up. The first thing he saw was the ceiling of the infirmary, the bright lights almost blinding him. He turned his head to his left. There sat his mother, who was sleeping in a chair next to his bed. She was resting on the table next to his bed. "Mom?" spoke Isseith as he tried to sit up, the pain from his abdomen stopping him halfway. "EGH." The noise from Isseith began to wake up his mom. "Isseith, you're awake." His mother then lunged at him and put him into a hug. That did hurt him slightly, but he endured it to not worry her. She was crying tears of relief. Isseith hugged her back regardless of the pain. "What's going on with you?" asked Isseith in a soft tone. His mom tried to stop her crying, but to no avail. "You've been asleep for 3 days. I wasn't able to see you for 18 hours after Azazel had brought you into the infirmary." His mother's crying becoming more serious. "You almost died." Azza tightened her grip around Isseith. Isseith looked down at his mother, still fixating on what he just heard. "I almost fucking died." The thought repeated itself in his mind. He could have been killed during battle. Everything would have been over for him. As the two sat there, a few guests had walked in unaware to them. "Hey kid." It was Azazel. With him were Shemazai and Barakiel. Isseith looked up at his father. A grim expression was across his face. "How close?" asked Isseith, who didn't bother with eye contact. Azazel knew what he meant by, "How close?" "If we didn't intervene then 1 second, your surgery was barely enough to keep you alive." Isseith lowered his head and placed his chin onto his mother's head. The 3 cadres looked at him. Shemazai had an upset expression across his face. Azazel walked up to the other side of Isseith's bed. You did well, son, I'm proud of you. You and Shemazai were able to hold the line from collapsing long enough for us to launch a full-scale counterattack. The Devil army was defeated after we killed most of the leaders that were present on the battlefield. Isseith smiled slightly, the others in the room confused by this. Isseith moved his mom away from him. She looked at him worriedly as he got up without looking at anyone. You okay, kid? Asked Azazel as Isseith began to walk towards the door of his room. Isseith stopped as he put his hand on the doorknob. A dark expression was across his face. I have something important to do, don't worry about me. Isseith then turned the knob and walked out the room, everyone inside bewildered by this. Calm your mind so that your energy may flow easily, spoke Isseith to himself. He had returned to his spot outside the Grigori. A few days had passed since he left the infirmary. The grand offensive had been postponed due to the Devil's surprise attack. Now the cadres were replanning the assault on Lusafat. From what Isseith was told, they were considering his critiques from the original plan. His wound had healed to an extent, but it still bothered him occasionally. He hoped that it wouldn't affect him after some time. Healing magic could only do so much. He was currently meditating in his spot. The ability to let his aura work in the way he did took time and patience. Aura control was the way he found out that he could intensify the amount of light, heat and holy aura his aura released. He found that out after he began his training with his father. He was given advice in order to get stronger, and this was the outcome. During one of his hunts as a training session, he came across a high-class eastern dragon. He used his spinning technique to slice the dragon from the mouth all the way to the end of its body, splitting the creature into two pieces. No one had seen him use it before. In fact, Shemazai was the only other person to know about it. Isseith didn't know what had been spoken after he fell unconscious. All he could do was wait. Increase the output subconsciously. Do that, your body will use less energy. Isseith kept focusing on his spot, his body slowly being encased by his red aura, the surrounding area not being affected by it. Isseith then began focusing his aura into the light intensity aspect, the surrounding area slowly burning as he increased it. Isseith then released his 8 wings, the aura encasing them immediately. As he sat there, someone flew over to him, landing a few feet away from him with a basket in hand. Isseith detected the aura right away. He decided to keep focusing. Azazel sat down in front of him and placed the basket in between them. He then took out a piece of bread and slice of cooked meat. Isseith decided to speak. Are you just planning on eating in front of me? I came to speak with you about something, but you seemed occupied. So, I decided to make something to eat while you meditate. Isseith shook his head. You're lucky I'm trying something difficult that doesn't require my direct attention. Now what is it? Asked Isseith, who was now letting his mind focus subconsciously. Our new offensive will take place soon. Sadly, we lost a good deal of officers during the attack. I need you to lead a battalion of soldiers for us, said Azazel as he took out a cup and poured water in it. Why should I lead? There are more experienced people than me, you know. I had a talk with Shemazai after we stabilized you after the battle. He told me about how you were able to identify certain elements of a battle and make the more favorable outcomes happen. Not everyone can do that, you know, and believe me when I say that your mother wasn't happy. She threatened to kill me if you were hurt like that again. But I can deal with that a different time, so are you in agreement? Sure, Dad, answered Isseith as he increased his aura again. Azazel smiled as he used the heat being released of Isseith to toast his bread, much to Isseith's annoyance. Alright, that is chapter 2, and damn, I was disappointed that I couldn't write the fight scene better. Fight scenes are the second most difficult things for me to write, and damn it are they hard. If I can picture it clearly without thinking of something else, then I can do something decent. But I was focused on future parts for King of Destruction. Anyways, I had to make sure that Isseith didn't win against the Leviathan. If I did, then I would be giving him plot armor and it wouldn't make sense power scale wise. Tell me what you think of the second chapter, and soon we will be getting into the grand offensive. And what about Isseith's title as He Who Pierces the Light of God? I thought it was pretty cool. I do read all reviews to each story as well. I don't respond to some if I can't think of one or I can't due to them being guest or having PM off. Thanks for reading, and I'll put the next out soon, hopefully. Previous ch2 of 13. Next, Chapter 3, Calm Before the Storm. Chapter 3. The Calm Before the Storm, Talking, Thinking. Locations, noises, underworld. Grigori Isseith sat in a room with other high-ranking fallen angels. In front of them was a board which displayed the redone version of the attack plan. This involved multiple fallback lines and key points to target. Isseithey looked over the plan. This one actually seemed possible. After we capture the southern sector of the city, then another attack will begin on the northern sector. This will cause the Devil forces to pull back units and allow us to use the main force to break through the center defense. The Devils will be under too much pressure and surrender the city to us. Any questions? Asked the instructor. One Fallen in the back raised his hand. Yes, you in the back. What units will start off the offensive? Asked the Fallen. The instructor walked over to his desk and grabbed a clipboard. Flipping through it, he found the page he was looking for. By the order of the General of Military Affairs, it states that the units directly under the cadres will be the first in the fighting. Along with those are the units under Hannibal, Isseithey and Malpas. All other units are to remain with the main army until the two sectors have fallen to us. Isseithey looked over to the two others that were called out, the two of them looking kind of shocked. Wait. Why am in charge of leading a unit? Asked Malpas in a scared voice. Everyone including Isseithey looked at him and have him a glare. The instructor looked over at him and spoke. You three have been hand-picked by our leaders to command a unit for this offensive. This goes with your training to be cadres in the future. The other Fallen in the room looked towards the three, the atmosphere in the room being weighted by the expressions of the three hand-picked. Enough, we have a job to do soon, and we need to take care of it. Focus on the offensive for now. I'm sure the cadres know what they're doing picking us to lead. Now pay attention to the instructor and stop looking at us and Malpas. Malpas looked over towards Isseithey with a concerned face. Grow a pair already, do your duty as a fallen angel and forget about heaven already. Isseithey then got up and left the room. The others looking at him as he left, the air heating up as he walked by. Malpas' face looked horrified. Isseithey didn't like the guy very much since he would always try to run away under pressure, that being something you couldn't do when it came to being a leader. That was most likely due to his fall from grace. He used to be a pure angel. Yet he was one of Isseithey's best friends, so he felt as if he was to help him become determined and confident as a future cadre. Isseithey would have seen where he was coming from if not for the fact the guy was a decent fighter when it came to the end. Isseithey having bested him in combat multiple times. Isseithey made his way through the numerous halls of the Grigori. The building felt like a labyrinth. He walked for 15 minutes past countless guards and soldiers preparing for the assault. Isseithey arrived at the place he was trying to get to soon after. His father's office, the most secure area in the entire building. The only reason of going there was to discuss something important. When he arrived outside the door, he put his hand up to knock. But he could hear someone talking inside. Being curious, he decided to put his ear up to the door. I'm not letting my son go back out there. He just got out of the infirmary a few days ago. He almost died, shouted a very worried mother. The voice of his mother was easily recognizable. She seemed worried about him again. Asa, listen, Isseithey is my son as well. I have trained him to deal with things like this for years now. I know you are worried about him after what happened, but rest assured. The Devils launched a surprise attack, and every sector was under heavy assault. Isseithey and Shemazai were able to hold off 2 Satan-class Devils long enough for us to relieve them. Azazel sounded annoyed. He almost died, Azazel. His mother shouted out. Isseithey lowered his head, he was disappointed in himself. Hundreds of fallen angels died. The battlefield around him was covered in the corpses of hundreds of fallen angels. We're in a war. Things like that are bound to happen. I was scared to know. I don't want to lose my only child because of something like this, but he's able to watch over himself. I put all my trust into him and so far, it has paid off. Just believe in him. Azazel sounded tired. The argument between them had been going on for some time now. Isseithey chose this time to walk in. Both his parents looked over at him, his mother had tears in her eyes. Isseithey, don't go, please, begged his mother. She pulled him into a hug, crying into his chest. Isseithey looked over to Azazel seeking some sort of assistance. Azazel just shook his head and leaned back into his chair with his hands on his face. Isseithey, now knowing he was alone in this, looked down at his mother. He then pushed her away from his chest gently, his armor being wet from the tears. Mom, I have to. It is my duty as a future leader, and I have to avenge the men who died during the attack. Isseithey then put both his hands on her shoulders. I'll be fine, I promise. Isseith then pulled his mother back into a hug. Isseith, I don't want to lose you. I don't know what I'll do if you're gone. His mother's cry became louder. Isseith now felt bad. I'll come back. You shouldn't worry about me this much. Isseith began rubbing the back of her head. His mother tightened her grip. Please come back. Okay. Okay mom, I will. Isseith's mom loosened her grip. She gave Isseith a forced smile before walking out of the room. After the door closed, Isseith looked over to his father. Azazel was still leaning back in his chair. How long were you two going at it? 2 hours before you showed up. I honestly don't think I could have lasted any longer by the way she was going at it. I was about to tap out. Both men started laughing. The pain in Azazel's voice was evident from the argument he had. Isseith leaned up against the wall, letting his wings free. I was at the briefing for the offensive. I have one question though. Azazel leaned forward with one hand on his chin and an eyebrow raised. Why are me and 2 others leading the assault on the north sector? No cadres? Isseith asked as he walked over to Azazel's desk. Azazel leaned forward and put his hands together. You're proving yourselves, that's why, and we plan on drawing out their defenders before launching the full force. Think of it as a scouting mission, but you'll end up engaging the enemy in open combat. Once we have a clear picture of the Devil's defenses in the city of Mordeth, then we can get revenge for the attack on our home. Isseith looked to the side as he began thinking. The facial expressions he made amusing Azazel. What's worrying you, kid? Azazel stood up from his desk. Walking over to where Isseith was, he put a hand on his shoulder. Isseith broke out his thoughts. Bad feeling about something. It feels like the same feeling I got earlier. It's most likely nothing to worry about. I'll go inform the others of what's to come. Isseith opened the door. Hey kid. Isseith turned back to Azazel, only to find a grin plastered across his face. You're close to getting your 5th pair of wings. Keep getting stronger and they'll come in. When they do, I'm treating you to the best night you'll ever have. Azazel then waved Isseith off. Alright, it's a deal. Isseith walked out of the room smiling. Sometimes that old man was a pretty decent father. Outskirts of the Grigori, Isseith sat in the silence of the later parts of the day. Unlike the human realm, the underworld didn't possess a day and night cycle. Why, you ask? It was due to it being the home of the evil beings and the fact that devils didn't do as well in sunlight as they did when it wasn't present. The human realm was a complicated place, and a violent one. A war was currently going on up there as well. So far it wasn't coming to an end either. There was always hope though. Azazel believed that if they defeated the devils here, then a peace negotiation or surrender would occur. Something like that seemed out of grasp for Isseith. The devils have suffered a great deal of casualties as well, some sources stating that a number of clans have been eliminated completely. If that was the case, then they could destroy the rest, but that only depended on how many more Lucifer could make. Same thing goes with God. Heaven was attacked multiple times by both sides. Isseith hadn't been born yet to see those fights. It still fascinated him though. The only way angels could replenish their numbers was by God creating more, which would be beneficial to the Grigori. More angels meant potentially more fallen angels, and if it was to save his race, then he would make heaven fall with his own hands. He. Well, that was the plan anyway. Isseith was not sure if he could actually do it. He looked over to the tree that was on his left. Words were carved into its trunk. Immoralator destios hernusul vilaxati. What did that mean? He had no idea. Those same words have been on that tree since he first found this spot. A mystery? Yes. Something worthwhile to investigate? No. He looked away from the tree. Calming his mind, he let his aura loose. The purest red light coated his body as the ground around him began to char. Slowly the ground began to catch fire as the area around him heated up. Isseith then unfurled his wings, all 8 coated in the red aura that the rest of his body let off. The air, while being heated, was perfectly still, the surrounding area not affected by the aura he was releasing. To have full control of oneself is almost impossible, almost. Mastering the balance in this world is a far more difficult challenge than breaking it. Pushing yourself far enough is one thing, but shattering your limits can only happen when you are at the end. Desperation and sheer will are the only things that can shatter your limits. Fighting is the key to it all. Isseith sat in his meditative position with his eyes closed, only slightly twitching when his aura moved in a different direction. Isseith then began to inhale a deep breath. Waiting a few seconds he exhaled, he then opened his eyes. His aura then increased drastically, the light becoming erratic. His irises began glowing as did his red bangs. His wings began moving as the air became hotter. The ground around him now disintegrating beneath him as a fire encircled him. His aura then began swirling around him, Isseithey keeping his focused expression as he increased his power. He then began moving his right arm, positioning it directly in front of him as he opened his palm. In a matter of seconds, a deep red light spear began forming in his palm. The spear let off waves of power as it began taking its true form. Extending its form until it was complete, the spear stabilized. Isseithey looked at the creation with a smirk, the power radiating from it was brilliant. Let this mark a new peak for myself. With this spear I shall pierce through the heart of the Satans. Isseithey then threw the spear into the air. He felt the heat let off as it flew through the air. He let the spear reach a safe distance. Isseithey then flicked his wrist, the magic still attached to the spear. The shockwave from the explosion made the ground shake violently as an intense heat scorched the earth beneath it. Isseithey shielded his body with his wings. The force from the shockwave slightly pushed him back. "Ha ha ha ha, now that was truly something, wouldn't you agree?" asked Isseithey to the person who had kept their presence hidden for a while now. Isseithey had noticed them the moment he began to meditate. "That was phenomenal, yes. I had to reveal myself due to the heat that released." Malpas then walked over towards Isseithey. The two men stood next to each other as the dust from the explosion settled. Isseithey looked over to Malpas. The blonde-haired fallen angel brushed himself off. "Sadly, all the dirt has stained my uniform." Malpas kept brushing himself off. His white armor stained by the dirt and dust. Isseithey put his wings away and stretched out his arms. Isseithey then let his aura die down, the red fading away quickly as the heat dropped. He began breathing hard as his aura became stable once again. "Using that power greatly drains my energy and magic reserve. Luckily I didn't need to use the holy ability alongside it this time." Isseithey then put his hand on his stomach. A sharp pain spread from where he was wounded previously. Malpas put both his hands together. A green glow then came from his palms. The magic he summoned found its way towards Isseithey. Isseithey looked down as his stomach began to glow a bright green. Slowly the pain began to fade away. After a few minutes Malpas stopped using his magic. Thanks, the pain hadn't fully gone away. Magic was only a temporary solution until a more proper healing solution was presented. Your abilities are truly something that many can envy. Your power to heal is a blessing. Isseithey felt like being nice to Malpas today. Perhaps it was due to him being able to increase the power of his spear, or the kindness of a fellow fallen angel. Isseithey didn't bother with trying to determine why. Malpas smiled. "It was my job in heaven to heal all who were injured. It didn't concern me if they were friend or foe." Malpas' face then became one of sadness. "Because of that I was casted out of heaven by God himself. It's funny to think that I was betrayed for helping people." Malpas let one tear fall from his eye. Isseithey patted him on the back. "Don't worry about it too much. I'm sure that one day you can be forgiven. You might not be let back in heaven, but forgiveness is forgiveness." Isseithey then led him away from the spot he was previously in. The two fallen walked back towards the Grigori in silence. The long walk was a moment to think. Upon returning to the main building of the Grigori they ran into someone. The person was leaning up against the wall next to a door. Isseithey waved over at him. The fallen angel then walked over to the pair. "What's your smug ass doing out here, Hannibal?" asked Isseithey as he and Malpas began laughing. Hannibal flipped the bird to Isseithey as he began laughing as well. "Just waiting for you guys to get back. Barakiel said we had to report to our new units so that we can get familiar with them. Personally, I don't think it matters since they're most likely to die anyway." Malpas looked at him with a horrified expression while Isseithey smacked him across the head. Smack, ow. What was that for? Have some sympathy, will ya? A lot of people are expected to die. Don't just toss it aside as if it was nothing. Isseithey walked over to the door and opened it while the two behind him followed. Hannibal was still rubbing his head where Isseithey smacked it. Malpas followed behind with a frown on his face while he tried to heal Hannibal. After walking for a bit, They arrived in the training grounds to find 3 different battalions of fallen angels lined up. Isseith looked over to the left and spotted Barakiel giving out instructions to them. "Hey Uncle Barakiel," shouted out Isseith as he and the other 2 approached him. Barakiel looked over to them and smiled. "I see he found you, that's good. You're just in time to instruct your new units, go over the plan with them." Isseith nodded as he looked towards the center battalion. "I'll take center, Malpas you're on the left and Hannibal you're on the right." Both fallen nodded and began to take their positions. Isseith walked to the front of his battalion and scanned over them, looking for the strongest out of the pick, only realizing that they were all low-level fallen angels. "This is not going to end well, oh what the hell. I am Isseith. I was put in charge of commanding you for our next major assault against the devils. I can guarantee that I will do everything in my power to lead you properly and try to keep order amongst our ranks. My colleagues and I will be the leaders in the assault on the north sector of the devil city of Mordeth." After finishing speaking, Isseith looked over towards Malpas. The poor guy was nervous. Isseith watched as Malpas struggled to give a proper introduction. He then turned his attention towards Hannibal. The fallen under him seemed more eager to get to the fighting. "Nice, my friends are polar opposites." Isseith shook his head as he chuckled. "Malpas and Hannibal over here," shouted Isseith as he went towards the display mechanism. Both fallen quickly walked over towards it and looked at Isseith. "What is it, Isseith?" asked Malpas with a frown on his face. "I can already tell that leadership between the 3 of us will cause a miscommunication between our units if we act as a single force. Malpas, you don't seem capable as a leader right now. So, I'll be the commanding force behind our assault. Hannibal, you seem more capable than Malpas. Even so, you don't have the strategic thinking when it comes to an entire unit of soldiers since you tend to fight alone. I will only ask that you 2 listen to my direct orders when it comes to an all-out attack, or my judgment will prove a better solution towards one of yours." Malpas nodded as Hannibal grunted. "Isn't this supposed to be a test for the 3 of us?" asked Hannibal. "That is correct, yes, but I'm only doing this so that we can bring as many people back as possible. Knowing you, I don't expect survivors from either side." Isseith's glare met Hannibal's. "Well, I guess that's true, bossman, so what's the plan?" "I can't formulate a true plan since we don't have much on the city in terms of knowledge. I can plan for the worst, which would be running into Satan-class devils or a Satan themselves. With them would be an entire army. If that was the case, then the cadres would move to intercept them, but I do believe the 3 of us working together would prove enough." Malpas looked worried. Hannibal nodded. "What is most likely to happen is the devils are holding out in strong fortifications, not only buildings but underground as well. That can be taken care of with bombardments and flushing them out with magic. I do believe that we can expect a heavy resistance. Due to that, I think it's best if Hannibal and I lead the charge. Malpas, you should stay on standby until we deal with most of the enemy defenses." Malpas nodded. "Wait a second. What about our units? Are they going in with us or are we just spearheading alone?" asked Hannibal as he looked back over his shoulder towards the battalions. "That will depend on how much resistance we encounter. If a lot, then we will go in alone. If minimal, then we will bring in our units. I say this because we can take blows and deal them back, they however can't." "All right." Isseith stood tall. "If we encounter an enemy in ultimate class or higher leading an army against us, then Hannibal and I will deal with the leader quickly. Once that is taken care of, Malpas will give the order for our men to attack. With that, the enemy will be forced to retreat due to the lack of leadership. That's how we are going to win this war. If we can take out the enemy leaders, the rest of the pillar will crumble, and we can sweep it up." "You always do have such a talent when it comes to battle tactics, Isseith." Malpas was smiling again. "I've been taught them since I was a child. Now that I think of it, that doesn't sound like a good childhood, ha ha ha." Isseith laughed as he put his hand together. "You had us," Hannibal retorted. Being childhood friends with Isseith was something he was happy about. Malpas joined them later on after falling from grace. That was around 5 years ago. "That only makes it sound worse, he he he." All 3 of them chuckled. Isseith then looked over towards the fallen soldiers. "Let's debrief them on what I told you and call it a day. The offensive starts tomorrow." The other 2 nodded their heads and walked back to their units. After debriefing their men, the 3 fallen angels ordered them to prepare. After waiting for some time, they decided to go to the food court within the Grigori. "What should we get to eat? I could go for anything," asked Hannibal as he held a hand over his growling stomach. Malpas looked around towards one of the restaurants. The menu didn't seem appetizing. They serve dragon here? Asked Malpas as he continued looking towards the menu. Yeah, they hunt down the weaker ones and use them for food. They have stew, sandwiches and steak. Personally, I think it's a little too tough for my liking, but it is high in protein, answered Isseithey as he pulled out an apple. Hannibal looked at Isseithey with an eyebrow raised. Where the hell did you get an apple? My mother brought me a basket, I just stored them in an artificial space. Hannibal looked impressed. Steak? Asked Hannibal as he pointed towards one of the restaurants. Isseithey nodded as Malpas looked on in wonder. Alright, let's go. That is it for this chapter, and I might say this was pretty fun to write. Yes, he has friends. Next chapter comes the storm. I look forward to writing it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope you enjoyed. First, previous ch3 of 13. Next chapter 4, the beginning. Chapter 4. The beginning, talking, thinking. Locations, noises, all units begin mobilization. I repeat, all units begin mobilization. A voice came from the intercom. With a matter of seconds, the ground began rumbling with the footsteps of thousands of fallen angels marching. Isseithey stood next to Hannibal and Malpas on a balcony overlooking the mass of soldiers lining up. Isseithey had a look of amazement across his face, the boy absorbing in the view. The time has come, you guys, we are going headfirst into the devil's strongest fortifications. I can hardly wait. Isseithey shouted out the last part. Malpas had a bead of nervous sweat going down his face. I can hardly believe we have to do this on our own. The thought still gets to me. He then wiped his head. Hannibal patted him on the back. Don't worry about it, pretty boy. I'll make sure they don't cut your face. Then that would truly be a tragedy, ha ha ha. Hannibal kept laughing as Malpas frowned. Isseithey looked back towards his friends. The image of a corpse-ridden battlefield flashed through his mind. Isseithey jerked back slightly, this catching the others' attention. Are you all right? Asked Malpas as he moved away from Hannibal. Hannibal turned his head towards the direction of the door, hearing a knock in the background. Isseithey calmed himself down and looked over towards Malpas. Yeah, just a flashback of something. I'll be fine, don't worry yourself about it, spoke Isseithey in a soft tone. Malpas raised an eyebrow as he continued looking at Isseithey. Alright then, I think Hannibal heard a knock on the door. We should see what it is about. Malpas had turned back towards the inside of the room they were in. Hannibal opened the door, finding Azazel and two other fallen angels with something in their hands. Is there something you need, Azazel? Asked Hannibal as he looked down at what appeared to be a red armored combat uniform. The Grigori's Armament and Weapon Division just produced new combat uniforms. I came to deliver them to you three and speak with Isseithey. Azazel then stepped inside room, passively moving Hannibal to the side. Isseithey and Malpas then walked inside the room from the balcony. They looked down at the three uniforms that were placed side by side. Azazel looked at Isseithey and waved. I brow you guys new uniforms. He then picked up the red one and tossed it to Isseithey. Catching it in his hands, he looked at it. Azazel then tossed a white one to Malpas and a black one to Hannibal. All three looked on in curiosity. These are state-of-the-art and customized to fit you specifically. They have enhanced protection and durable enough to take blasts from multiple middle-class devils. Isseithey grinned heavily, the look in his eyes igniting his thirst for battle. I see they went all out this time, I'm glad. My old armor still has a hole in it from the last fight. Isseithey and the others then began to equip them. A solid single-piece tunic was covered in thin armor padding as a base. Then the other parts of the armor followed, including a reinforced chest plate, arm pads, leg pads and groin plates. A cape was also present, being the same color as the armor. Isseithey moved around in the armor, finding it far more flexible than he originally anticipated. I see that you noticed the flexibility. We managed to produce a new material a few weeks ago. This stuff is far superior to the old stuff and works better too. Azazel had a smirk across his face, his ego being lifted. Is that so? Only testing it fully can I see the results. Isseithey then put on the last piece of the armor. Hannibal finished putting on his armor and did a spinning kick. Wow, this thing will do wonders. I can't wait to get to the front. Azazel looked over at Hannibal. Calm down, kid, I still have something to say. All attention was then directed towards Azazel. He then cleared his throat and looked towards Isseithey. "Since I have put the trust into you to lead a battalion, you are responsible for bringing them back. I expect casualties, but not bringing back any men will be an issue. I'm not placing Isseithey in charge for bringing everyone back either." He then looked over towards Hannibal and Malpas. "You two are also responsible for your men too. Since this is a test for all three of you, make sure you are careful out there. We march in 10 minutes, be ready." Azazel then turned around and began to walk out the room. The two with him followed, closing the door as they left. The three still in the room looked at the door, their facial expressions all saying something else. Isseithey was the first one to speak up. The other two looked over at him. "You heard him, let's go meet up with our units." The other two nodded and they left the room. After a few minutes of walking, they arrived at the army. Isseithey paused as he realized something. "Where the hell are our units as anyway?" They looked around searching for their men. Malpas looked towards the center of the formation, Hannibal looking towards the rear. Isseithey looked for something else, a cadre. "Hey! Uncle Shemazai!" Isseithey shouted over at his uncle. Shemazai looked in the direction of which he heard Isseithey's voice. Shemazai walked over to Isseithey with a clipboard in his hand. "Ah, Isseithey. You should be meeting up in the front with the other cadres. Take Hannibal and Malpas with you and inform Azazel that all forces are ready to march." Shemazai then walked away from Isseithey as he went back to going over the army. Isseithey stood there bewildered as Shemazai walked away. Turning back towards his friends, he walked over. Malpas looked at Isseithey for an answer. "What did he tell you?" asked Hannibal. "We're going to the front of the army with the other cadres. Also I have to tell Azazel that everything is ready to go." Isseithey scratched the back of his head. "All right then, we should hurry." Malpas looked nervous again. Isseithey frowned. "Malpas, you know you don't have to be nervous, right?" The three of them began walking past dozens of fallen angels, some looking at them with envy, others with ill intent. Malpas tried to fake a smile. "I know that, I'm just worried that something bad will happen. I wasn't trained to fight, I'm a healer." Both Isseithey and Hannibal looked at him suspiciously. "Are you fishing for compliments?" asked Isseithey as he glared at Malpas. The fallen angel figuratively shrunk in his place. "I thought so, keep your chin up and come one. You can't earn respect if you're just going to look like that." Hannibal grumbled, Isseithey agreeing with him. He cared for his friends a lot, but when it came down to it, he had to force reality on them. Either it being in battle or it being around the Grigori. Hannibal was a stubborn delinquent at heart. Malpas was a naive, pure-hearted fool. Isseithey was the glue that held them together, otherwise they wouldn't be friends. He could remember the day that he and Hannibal first met Malpas. They were in a training camp 5 years back. Their goal was to survive the longest before tapping out. Left with no food or tools, they had to do everything themselves. It was day 13 when a problem had occurred. Isseithey was busy hunting down something to eat with a light spear, his prey being a common animal similar to cattle in the underworld. He was chasing it in a mountainous territory. Danger filled the area as he flew around it. Something was bothering him about the area though, it felt heavier than it should. Eventually he caught up to it and impaled it through the stomach. After it fell over dead, he went to land next to it. He dissipated his light spear. After that he began to disembowel the creature. During that process he heard a noise coming from a nearby bush. As he looked over towards it, something jumped out. He didn't get a good chance to look at it as it tackled him of the side of a cliff. During the fall he managed to kill it by stabbing it through the chest with a light sword. After the struggle was over, he tried to release his wings to fix his fall. Failing to notice how far he fell, he unfurled his wings the moment he hit the ground. That broke them with a sick crunching noise. He screamed out in pain, trying to flip over to get off his back. A broken wing was painful in itself. 8 of them was excruciating. To this day it was still the most painful thing he had experienced. After he managed to stand up, he took a good look at his wings. Some were bleeding whilst others were bending the wrong way. The view was depressing. His wings were his pride. To be born a fallen angel was one thing, but to be born powerful was something else. His pride was scarred. The thought made him sit down and cry. Whilst he was doing, a noise came from one of the caves near him, but he didn't acknowledge it. Still crying as he sat there, the noise revealed its owner. A young blond boy with blue eyes, dressed in a white uniform. The young boy walked over to Isseithey, his face donning a frown. He didn't ask Isseithey anything, only getting on his knees behind him. Slowly he placed both his hands behind Isseithey, and a green glow came out of them. Isseithey looked behind him as he saw his wings being coated in green glow. "Don't worry about your wings, I can heal them quickly for you," the young boy smiled. Isseithey didn't respond, he just sat there as the pain faded away slowly. After a minute or so the pain was gone. "You can move your wings now, they're all fixed." Isseithey looked behind him as his wings were restored. Isseithey turned around and bowed respectfully. "Thank you. What's your name?" asked Isseithey as he raised his head to look at the boy. The blond boy released his wing, 2 pairs releasing from his back. Isseithey looked at him with thankful eyes. "I'm Malpas, I was an angel, but I fell from grace not that long ago." Isseithey raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing out here?" asked Isseithey. Malpas looked at Isseithey with an embarrassed face. "I was banished to the underworld after I committed a sin. I ended up here once I was transported. I've been here for a few days surviving off the common fruits." Malpas pointed over towards the cave he came out of. Isseithey looked over to the cave. The creature that he killed was next to it. "Holy shit, that was a dragon." Malpas looked over to the corpse of the animal. The blood from the wound in its chest spilled across the ground. "What about you?" asked Malpas as he turned back to Isseithey. "I'm in a training camp, I was hunting down dinner. I was on top of the cliff and that dragon ambushed me." "Oh, I thought they sent someone to kill me." Isseithey turned around confused. "Either you are just blissfully ignorant or just plain retarded. You can come back with me, my friend Hannibal is waiting back at our hideout." Isseithey then stood up and retracted his wings. He then looked back at Malpas, who was still on his knees. "Welcome to the Grigori." Malpas smiled brightly. After that he introduced him to Hannibal, who began to bully the poor guy. Those were the good old times. War wasn't something that was the main concern to him. Isseithey unknowingly was staring off into the distance. His friends were looking at him funny. "Isseithey, look out!" shouted Malpas. Isseithey came back to reality, but it was too late. Thud! Isseithey fell over onto the ground. He caught himself before his face hit it. Who the hell did that? Looking back, Isseithey noticed the leg of the person that tripped him was still sticking out. "Well, if it isn't my favorite nephew Isseithey. I thought you would have been a little more careful. You might end up tripping over a mine next time." The voice was deep. Isseithey immediately knew who it was. Standing back up and dusting himself off, Isseithey looked at the person. "Nice to see you as well, Uncle Kokebile. I see you're still the same cunt from last time." Isseithey retorted with an unenthusiastic look. Kokebile smirked. The cadre placed a hand on Isseithey's shoulder. "I see you're trying to step up into the big leagues. For someone like you that shouldn't be a problem, however." Kokebile looked over towards Hannibal and Malpas. Isseithey looked back towards them as well. He then narrowed his eyes as he looked back towards Kokebile. "What about them? They don't have what it takes to be cadres. I can only assume they will hold you back from your true potential." Isseithey glared at Kokebile. "My friends do not influence my abilities, no one is standing in my way." Isseithey then knocked Kokebile's hand off his shoulder. The cadre grunted. "I see how it is then. Just know that when it comes to it, in the end the only person that you can rely on is yourself." Kokebile then walked away. Isseithey watched as he walked towards the other cadres. Bastard. Underworld Devil Territory. The march into the Devil Territory was a long one. Currently the army was preparing separate, coming towards the city of Mordith. Isseithey, Hannibal and Malpas were walking with Azazel. "You 3 prepared?" asked Azazel as he began to put on a small amount of armor. Isseithey smirked at his question. "Yes, we already went over the plan with the units under us and agreed control over leadership." "Let me guess, you are the leader?" asked Azazel as he fitted some guards on his arms. "Yep, the others can't lead the way I can. I want to make sure that we can effectively deal with our enemies." Isseithey turned back to look at his friends. Hannibal had Malpas in a headlock whilst giving him a noogie. "Hannibal, stop bullying him. Try that with me and see what happens." Isseithey's glare met Hannibal's. The two stared each other down until Hannibal inevitably backed down. "Fine, always have to ruin the fun." Hannibal let go of Malpas. He then tried to fix his hair from where Hannibal had messed it up. "Thanks, Isseithey." Malpas then fixed his hair. Isseithey just shook his head. "No problem. Just stop him from doing it next time. Get ready, we might start the attacks soon." Both fallen nodded and rushed towards the 3 battalions under their control. Isseith remained with his father, the two of them having stern expressions. Isseith, I have a feeling you might want to be extra cautious with your friends. They might be the thing that screws you over. Make sure that they listen to you. I don't want to have to go back home and tell your mother that you died today. Isseith looked at Azazel angrily. What's up with you guys not trusting Hannibal and Malpas? Isseith was suspicious of something at this point in time. This was the first time that Azazel had ever said something negative about his friends. We just want to make sure that you make the right decisions, nothing against them. Now get your men ready. We move again soon directly towards the city. Azazel had practically shooed Isseith away. Fine, I'll see you on the battlefield then. Isseith then released his wings and flew away. Azazel watched as Isseith disappeared among the masses of armed men, the noise of the army drowning out the sounds of flapping wings. Don't fail them, son. Azazel then turned around and began walking towards the other cadres. Underworld Mordeth Isseith looked on at the enemy city. The massive territory was extremely large. You could compare it to a territory belonging to one of the many pillar territories. The massive rows of houses and buildings were as far as the eye could see. A large river ran through the center of the city, bridges and houses lined the canals that were created. In the center of the town a majestic sight to say the least, my dear friends. Perhaps bringing destruction upon it might be too sinful. Malpas spoke as he took in the view. His hair was blowing in the wind as he stood next to Isseith and Hannibal. Since when do we care about sinning? Asked Hannibal as he looked at the city. Isseith turned his head to look at Malpas. You fell from grace years ago, blowing up a city or two isn't evil, responded Isseith as he put a hand up to his ear. This just seems a little too much for me, Isseith. Malpas looked at Isseith with a frown. They literally attacked the Grigori not that long ago. I'm getting revenge for that. Isseith summoned a communication circle in his palm. Malpas, stop fucking complaining already, it's too late to pull out, we already came here. Hannibal then turned back and walked towards the units of soldiers. Malpas's frown strengthened. Isseith who was talking to someone through the communication circle. Malpas looked at Isseith as if he was waiting for him to say something. Alright, I'll inform them. Isseith then hung up the call. Turning to face the units he was now in total control of. Attention everyone, the attack on the Devil's City will commence immediately under the order of Azazel. Let's begin our campaign to the Devil capital of Lusafat. Let's give these bastards true hell for what they have done to our homes. Isseith's short speech had excited the fallen ranks. My dear friends, let us march into the city and incinerate it completely. Isseith then raised his arm above his head and summoned a mass of red light spears. Hannibal, take the men into the air and have them summon as many light spears as they can. We will bombard the devils until they come out of hiding, then slaughter them all. Hannibal looked at Isseith with a ferocious grin. Yes sir. Hannibal was now excited. Isseith had given him an order to do what he loved, destroy the devils until he was tired. Malpas, you stay in the rear and make sure that our flanks are protected with your men. If enemy forces are gathering or approaching, then use the communication circles. I'll leave this area to you. Isseith then flew over toward the city's northern sector. Alright then, be careful, shouted out Malpas as Isseith flew away. Malpas looked back towards his men, he was determined. Isseith had his spears still floating in the air as he approached the city entrance. There was no sign of any devils in the nearby area. Something felt off about it, Isseith could feel it as well. An ambush most likely, probably to deal the most damage in one attack. Isseith thought as he walked through a street. It was lined with businesses and homes, a tavern stuck out through. The windows were boarded up, Isseith could feel an aura from inside the building. This is way too fucking obvious. Isseith then threw his hand down. Every spear that he had summoned then started moving towards him. Shin, the light spears then landed around him with him at the center. Some buildings had been pierced through their roofs. The devils inside began to scram out the doors into the streets. Ha! Snap, boom, mm. Isseith had detonated each of his spears with a single snap. The spears exploded, causing an eruption of flames to cast over a large chunk of the area. Isseith smiled before flying up into the air. After a few seconds he was next to Hannibal, the fallen having battle-hungry eyes. Rain hell upon them, they are inside the buildings. I'll hunt for a leader in this area, then the massacre can happen. Isseithey then took off once again. Hannibal turned back to his men. "Launch your spears." At that moment a large volley of light spears began to cast down upon the area. Hannibal throwing multiple in quick succession. Below the devil garrison was scattering in order to escape the area. Hundreds of devil soldiers began to fly into the air. Hannibal then put his hand up, signaling something to the men behind him. The mass of fallen angels then flew down to intercept the devil soldiers. The two sides began a vicious one-sided clash. Hannibal watched as his men overwhelmed the panicked devil masses, but something had caught his eye. The devils that had been running away were all heading in the same direction. He decided to investigate. Flying over towards the direction of where they were heading, he saw some sort of underground entrance. Hannibal then put a hand up to his ear and summoned a communication circle. "I assume that you ran into something. Judging from the noise you're making, it had to be something that caught your attention." Isseithey was on the other side of the communication circle. "Yeah, there is some sort of underground entrance near me. I think they are trying to hide underground. Any ideas?" asked Hannibal as he continued to rain down light spears against the devil soldiers. "Secure the entrance and any others that you find. Wait for me to get back, then we can investigate any further." Isseithey gave a direct order. "All right, how's the hunt? I can't find any high-power signatures at all. They might be in a different part of the city. I'll be over in a couple of minutes." Isseithey then hung up the call. Hannibal then descended to the ground near the entrance. He summoned a light spear in his hand and walked over to the entrance, waiting for any devils to either come out or attempt to enter. What the hell? He looked into the entrance. It was pitch black. His curiosity was high, but a bad feeling in his stomach was preventing him from entering. A feeling of dread had rushed through his person. The feeling had almost never had flooded his senses before. He slightly backed up whilst summoning another light spear in his other hand. He wasn't about to deal with this single-handedly. Back with Isseithey, who currently flying high above the city scouting for any leader or powerful devils. He had failed to locate any of them. This made him very suspicious of what was going on. Where's Hannibal at? He surveyed the area once again. After looking around for a bit, he managed to find Hannibal due to an influx of power coming from a certain direction. He quickly flew down towards him, summoning a light spear as he descended. Hannibal looked up as Isseithey landed next to him. "What's the status on any other entrances?" "Oh, I didn't give any order to search. This entrance had to be cut off from anyone getting in or out." Isseithey face-palmed. "I gave you an order and you didn't even follow it. Hannibal, this goes against everything that we had planned out. Listen to a direct order." Isseithey was angry. Hannibal not following directions. The only reason was that it could potentially cost them victory. "Chill out, Isseithey. I had a job to do. If you haven't forgotten, then you know that me and Malpas are also being tested in this. We have the right to act on our own if we see fit." He then pushed Isseithey. Isseithey then punched him across the face, causing Hannibal to fall to the ground. "Don't you ever try something like that with me again, you stubborn son of a bitch. I have been placed responsible for all of you. If I have to knock out numbers, I will." Isseithey spoke in a cold tone, Hannibal looking at his friend with wide eyes. For once he noticed how serious Isseithey could be when it came to being a leader. His figure was appearing dark as his aura took on an ominous feeling. His red eyes pierced through his body. The expression on his face was one of pure terror. Isseithey didn't say another word. He casually walked away and flew towards the main force. Hannibal was still on the ground when Isseithey left, the fallen getting a hard check of reality. That's a wrap for this chapter. The next one will probably be longer since it's the true start to the actual battle for Mordeth. I have some chapter layouts ready for some near future events which I think might work for what I plan on doing for this story. I have some things I wanted to say, but I don't think that they would fit here. Anyway, I hope this got you excited for the next part of the battle. I know it seems that it is odd right now, but trust me, it will change next chapter. Also, Isseithey meeting Malpas in the way he did was supposed to be funnier. I just didn't know what to do. I thank you for reading. First, previous ch4 of 13 next. Chapter 5. Unease. Chapter 5. Talking. Thinking. Locations, noises, underworld, Mordeth. I gave you an order and you didn't even follow it. Hannibal, this goes against everything that we had planned out. Listen to a direct order. Isseithey was angry. Hannibal not following directions. The only reason was that it could potentially cost them victory. Chill out, Isseithey. I had a job to do. If you haven't forgotten, then you know that me and Malpas are also being tested in this. We have the right to act on our own if we see fit." He then pushed Isseithey. Isseithey then punched him across the face, causing Hannibal to fall to the ground. "Don't you ever try something like that with me again, you stubborn son of a bitch. I have been placed responsible for all of you. If I have to knock out numbers, I will." Isseithey spoke in a cold tone, Hannibal looking at his friend with wide eyes. For once he noticed how serious Isseithey could be when it came to being a leader. His figure was appearing dark as his aura took on an ominous feeling. His red eyes pierced through his body, the expression on his face was one of pure terror. Isseithey didn't say another word, he casually walked away and flew towards the main force. Hannibal was still on the ground when Isseithey left, the fallen getting a hard check of reality. This event had just played out between these two friends, Isseithey leaving out of anger, Hannibal still remaining in his spot from where he was knocked down. Unknown to either of them, there was someone watching them from a faraway tower. The figure having a gnarly smile across their face. Scene break. Isseithey was flying back towards the main force that he oversaw, having left it in order to get a general idea of the area. The one currently in charge of the men there was his left-hand man Malpas, a fallen that he had trusted with his life. Malpas was busy moving the men into position for invasion of the north sector as of Isseithey's order. Malpas, donned in his white armor, had assembled the 3 battalions in such a way that an encirclement was easily obtainable. Isseithey noticed the formation of the men as he flew over them. He then descended towards Malpas whilst looking back towards the city, making sure that nothing was happening as he temporarily retreated. After a few seconds he had come in contact with the ground. Using his wings, he dispersed of the dirt that he had kicked up. "Isseithey, you have returned. I already moved everyone into position, and we are ready to begin our assault." Malpas began looking around. "Where's Hannibal?" he asked Isseithey, who was going over something with his magic screen. Isseithey still seemed a little angered. "I left him back in the city, he found something in one of the underground passageways." Isseithey turned away from Malpas as he put two things together. "Why did you leave him?" Isseithey looked back at Malpas with a blank expression. "Hannibal said that he was busy, so I left him. The guy might be one of my only friends, but I'm not dealing with his shit during an offensive. Now let's get focused before I give the order." Isseithey then looked over towards an incoming officer. "Sir, I have an urgent message from the cadres." The officer was running towards the two of them quickly. Isseithey raised an eyebrow as he turned in the man's direction. An urgent message from the cadres was a rare occurrence, especially since he was taking control. "You may speak." Isseithey took on a serious expression. The officer straightened himself out and handed Isseithey note. "Due to unknown enemy presence, the cadres have ordered us to send orders by note. Sir, many scouting parties have discovered a strange presence underneath the city from the underground passageways. We have been issued orders to evacuate the city until this has been dealt with." The officer then bowed. Isseithey looked towards Malpas, and he returned the look. "Get the men out of here, I'll go look for Hannibal." Isseithey then spread his wings out and took off. Malpas looked over to the men and began to give out orders. As Isseithey scanned over the city, he noticed the strange feeling that he had felt earlier was more frequent, and more powerful. "What the hell?" Isseithey continued flying until he spotted a something black on the ground. Small amount of red could be seen. A sense of dread overcame Isseithey as he dived down towards it. Isseithey couldn't sense his friend's power signature at all. The only thing that was present was the dreadful feeling that was being released into the air. Isseithey landed soon after. Once he got a closer look on what he had spotted, something inside him began going off. It was a pile of black feathers covered in blood. This was an immediate trigger for Isseithey. He hadn't hit Hannibal hard enough to draw blood, nor did he cause any feathers to fall out. As he looked around, the spotted more blood around him on the walls of the surrounding buildings. "Hannibal?" Isseithey now had a worried expression on his face. Isseithey looked towards the entrance of the passageway into the underground tunnels that he had left Hannibal by. Isseithey looked towards the entrance and summoned a light sword. Back with Malpas, it was well organized. He had moved everyone into a strong formation with well-protected flanks. He himself stood at the front, a light spear in his hand, contrasting against his flawless white armor. For someone who seemed cowardly by nature, Malpas looked like a firm leader, a symbol of power on the battlefield. Malpas looked onward towards the city. He was worried about his friends that were still inside. Hannibal was his biggest worry. Knowing him for the time he was, things couldn't be good since they usually weren't far off from each other. During the devil's surprise attack, he was busy aiding the wounded whilst the others fought somewhere else. That itself was a problem since they worked best when together. It was fun for them. Back with Isseithey, things were bad. He had found Hannibal but not in the best of shapes, due to the large gaping hole in his abdomen. The blood loss was bad. It was almost to the point when Isseithey had been blasted through the stomach. "Don't worry, man, I'll get you to Malpas and he'll heal you quickly." Hannibal was barely conscious and was fading in and out. Isseithey had found him at the bottom of the stairwell that led underground. Surprisingly, he didn't see what caused it. As Isseithey flew through the streets, an object flew past him. Isseithey turned his head towards it as it stopped in front of him. He stopped immediately as the thing in front of him revealed itself, a devil. Judging from the aura that surrounded him, the devil had to be of an ultimate class, perhaps high class. The devil himself had black hair and the eyes to match. The devil family it was from wasn't a good guess. "Stop right there. You fallen angels have defiled this ancient city with your presence. My clan has spent thousands of years building this place up from the ground, making sure that all could live for us. Now you come here and cause them to flee, leaving nothing left for us." The devil then raised an arm toward Isseithey. Instinctively he wrapped Hannibal in his wings and covered him. The devil began summoning a black magic circle with an unidentified symbol within its runes. It took a bit of time before he managed to see exactly what it was, the symbol for the House of Gop. Isseithey got into his fighting stance. His empowered light spear then formed in his arms. With Hannibal in his wings, Isseithey couldn't be as mobile. The devil then aimed his magic circle into the air, a black beam shooting directly above them. Isseithey looked at the devil as the ground began to shake violently. The devil smirked. "You'll soon find out why invading us was a big mistake." The devil then flew into the air as cracks began to form in the ground. Isseithey freed up one of his wings before taking back off towards friendly lines. He kept his eye on the devil though. That bastard must have sent a signal in order to attack. But why is the ground shaking? Isseithey's question was answered as a ginormous monster-looking hand broke through the ground, the force sending rocks and buildings flying across the city. The ground around the hand began to collapse inward. Devil soldiers began flying out of it towards the Gop. Isseithey looked on in worry as the numbers changed from dozens to hundreds. They wouldn't be a problem for him if he was alone, but Hannibal being out of action meant that fighting anyone wasn't something he could do. He turned his head away from the enemy, his focus shifting towards getting back to Malpas. Isseithey felt the blood of his friend dripping down his back. The cold feeling wasn't pleasant. The lifeless feeling was something that he didn't want to experience again. "All I have to do is get him to Malpas and we can launch a counterattack on them." Isseithey weaved through the streets and finally broke through the city limit. Friendly lines were on the horizon and clear as day. Isseithey could see Malpas looking towards him, but his face quickly turned to one of shock as a large shadow had casted over them. Ruer, a cold feeling shot through Isseithey. A sense of horror and dread flowed through his nerves. He slowly turned his head as a massive creature broke through the city. It was a chimera at least 40 meters tall with a draconic appearance. Black scales with white horns covered its boy along with its misshapen wings. Isseithey made it friendly lines not soon after. "Malpas!" Isseithey shouted, waiting for his friend to get down to ground level. Malpas descended quickly in order to reach Isseithey and Hannibal, who he could see was bleeding badly. Isseithey placed Hannibal on the ground gently. He turned his head to look at the blood that had stained his armor, along with a large portion that coated his wings. Anger began to overtake his current emotions. Malpas landed shortly after Isseithey had gotten to the front line. "Dear God, what happened?" Malpas dropped to his knees and put both his hands above Hannibal's wound. A green glow began to emit from his palms. The magic floated over toward Hannibal. Hannibal was then coated in a green glow. His wound was quickly sealing itself up. "I found him like this near one of the underground entrances. I don't know what happened to him though." Isseithey looked back towards the city. Massive amounts of devils and fallen angels were battling against one another. The chimera was farther away fighting against what he would assume would be a cadre or two. "Isseithey, did you do this?" Malpas looked at Isseithey with narrow eyes. This expression being a first for him. Isseithey looked back towards Malpas. What did you just say? Isseith looked back at him with anger. Did you do this to Hannibal? Malpas finished healing Hannibal's wound. He wouldn't wake up anytime soon. Malpas think for a second. If I wanted to kill him, then I would have left him in the city and not have gone to retrieve him. Isseith pointed towards the swarm of devils that were heading towards them. We can discuss this later. For now, get Hannibal to a safe zone so that we can fight them on the battlefield. Isseith turned back towards the devils. A red light spear began forming in his palm. Malpas kept his eyes peeled on Isseith. Isseith threw his spear towards the incoming devils. His palm stayed out. The spear got closer until it was in the center of the enemy formation. Seeing this, Isseith closed his palm. Boom! An explosion was set off from the light spear. Devil soldiers continued to pour out of the smoke, but now there was a large gap in their lines. All forces on standby. Isseith flew up into the air, his soldiers right behind him. Isseith watched as the smoke cleared up, waiting for the enemy to get in the right position. Once he noticed that they had regathered, Isseith smirked. Hey, easy. Isseith began to summon 2 more light spears, both of them radiating the same chaotic power of the first one. Isseith waited for the enemy to get slightly closer before throwing both of them. As they flew into the air, they broke through magic circles meant to hold them back, both impaling a devil soldier each. The devils around them halted and backed away from their fallen ally. Charge! Isseith shouted out as his force began to attack the panicked devil lines. Isseith himself was focusing on finding the commanding devil in the attack. Where's that Gop at? Isseith was flying past devil soldiers on his hunt, occasionally killing 1 or 2 that attempted to fight him. Last time I saw him, he was with the Chimera. If he were still with it, then there could be a chance that I can wipe out this part of the city without having to worry about a counterattack. Using scorched earth would drain me completely after detonating it, but there wouldn't be any enemies to worry about, hopefully. I'll have to wait until Malpas returns. He's the only one that can withstand the heat after I use it. Isseith flew into the air behind the devil front. Seeing the Chimera off in the distance engaging his uncles was enough for him to continue with this plan. Looking back at his forces, they seemed to be winning. Devil casualties appeared to be higher than that of his. Something seemed off though. Surely the garrison would be more numerous than a couple of hundred devils and a Chimera. They could be diverting forces for another offensive. The loss against us as the Grigori along with the loss of a Leviathan would have devastated their morale. If that is the case, then a Chimera would have been a failsafe in order to stall for time in order to gather a force for a counterattack. Isseith quickly turned towards his left as an iron spear nearly impaled him through his chest. Isseith rolled out of the way and summoned a light spear. He looked towards the source of the spear. The Gop had returned in an ambush attack. Isseith gritted his teeth together. You again? I thought you would have run away. Isseith narrowed his eyes on his opponent. I thought that you would have fallen just like that other disgusting crow I stabbed earlier. Seems like you're a slippery one. Isseith paused. Something in his mind snapped. You did that to Hannibal. Isseith lowered his head to where his eyes were covered. The red glow pierced through the darkness. His aura began rising. The heat being released was rising as well. Gop looked at Isseith with a nasty smile. Sure did. He looked in the wrong spot and shank. My spear went through his stomach. Oh, are you upset? Did I hurt your buddy that you were arguing with? The devil began laughing maniacally. Now you know what it is like to feel pain. You bastards invaded my city and killed my men. Unknown to either of them, the fallen soldiers had wiped out the remaining devil garrison in the sector. They decided to surround both Isseith and Gop. Light spears lined every hand that surrounded them. But you and your allies will pay once the Satan Leviathan arrives. She will kill all of you for the sake of all Devi. His speech was interrupted by Isseith, who punched him in the face, the forces causing the devil to fly into the ground. Isseith didn't say a word as he looked down at the devil with pity, his red orbs piercing through the soul of the devil. You think that a cheap shot will be enough to beat me? Ha, I've taken hits harder from the devil children. Isseith dropped down to the ground, putting his wings away in the process. Is that so? Let me try harder then. Isseith began summoning a strong holy aura into his fists. He then rushed the devil. Blair. The devil grabbed his stomach as Isseith pulled his fists out of it. The holy aura that coated it seemingly caused significant damage to the devil. The devil began throwing up blood as a searing pain could be heard. Hurts, doesn't it? Holy aura is dangerous towards devils. Standing next to any that is highly focused is enough to vaporize a devil with ease. As a fallen, our holy aura is tainted, but it is still there. My friend who has been a fallen for a short time has taught me how to draw out the pure holy aura within me. My father, being immensely powerful, also benefited on how much I have. Isseithey walked back over to the devil, dodging the spear that was aimed for his face and grabbing it. Along with the knowledge that the tainted aura is the result of time after falling, my friend has purer aura than my mother, who had fallen relatively recently compared to the time that this war has been raging. This knowledge is new to most people, and something I plan on diving deeper into later on. Isseithey pulled the spear closer to him and punched the devil in the face. This time the devil fell onto the ground. Not a muscle moved after taking an enhanced aura-coated fist from Isseithey. Isseithey walked over to the body of the devil and put a hand above its chest. A light spear then formed in his palm and was aimed downward towards the devil's heart. You, however, are nothing more than a devil, a creature that needs to be put down before causing unrepairable damage to something important. Isseithey then stabbed his light spear through the devil's heart, this killing him instantly. The devil's corpse then vaporized. Isseithey stood in his spot still with his light spear impaled into the ground. The fallen around him were silent as Isseithey lifted his head up to look at them. Take this as an example to our enemy that we are not afraid to fight them. We will stain the underworld with the blood of our enemies. The fallen around him began cheering with him. Isseithey looked on, his aura burning the ground beneath him. Isseithey. A voice called out to him from a distance. Isseithey looked in the direction of the voice. He smiled, seeing Malpas returning to the front. It's about time you came back. What the status on Hannibal? Isseithey looked at Malpas, who seemed panicked. He's safe in the reserve. If he can get some blood, then he will be able to come back for the fighting. He's still unconscious though. The medical team said that he would be fine. Isseithey smiled at the news. Now that was enough to calm him down. Great. The men here have finished up the garrison. From what I could tell, the devils are retreating toward the outskirts of the city. The Chimera is up, causing problems for us. If I am correct, then the enemy is preparing a counterattack. Isseithey and Malpas began walking in the city. The soldiers followed behind them. Do you think a counterattack is possible? I wouldn't think that they would have enough troops in order to do something so daring. Malpas, the devil I had just killed, confirmed my theory that they plan on doing a counterattack, and the leader is a Satan. Isseithey could hear Malpas stop walking. He turned back and grabbed onto his shoulder pad. We don't have time to think about it right now. I already did all the thinking and turns out it fits. All I know is that they are coming, but I don't know when. I killed him before getting any other information out of him, but knowing that they are coming is enough for the cadres to prepare for it. Isseithey looked over towards the soldiers behind him. The look of fear was evident on their faces. Don't worry about the Satan men. You will not be fighting them head-on. I'll make sure of it that you all are safe. If not, then my life is yours. Isseithey's solid expression had shown that he was serious about what he said. Some of the men lost the fear to an extent. Isseithey, you shouldn't be throwing your life around like that. What if you can't keep that promise? Malpas looked worried for his friend. Then I will happily give up my life in the only way I know how to. Killing yourself in a suicidal move isn't the path you should be going down. What would the others think if they knew you did something that reckless? Isseithey looked back at Malpas. Calm down. I don't plan on having to lose my life. Isseithey turned back to face the front. His expression was a serious one. Malpas looked over at Isseithey and sighed. Let's move to meet up with the cadres before we can do anything else. The devil army marching towards us has to be prepared for before we can advance any further into the devil territory. They marched through the city. Isseithey kept his men from doing any ransacking, since they would most likely use the city as a temporary base of operations before marching again. It didn't take long for them to meet up with Azazel, who was resting alongside a couple of other cadres. Isseithey, where's Hannibal? Azazel took notice that he was only with Malpas when they would usually be in the famous trio. He's in the reserve. A devil from the Gop family had impaled him pretty badly. I found him nearly dead after you called for a temporary retreat. That's when everything turned to shit. Isseithey sat down next to his father on a log in front of a fire. Was the devil taken care of? Like I would anyone live after doing something like that to my friends? I stabbed him through the heart before marching here. Isseithey looked over towards Malpas, who was sitting on the adjacent log. Was the resistance hard to break? Azazel leaned over and put his arm around Isseithey. much to the embarrassment of his son. No, but it was a little too easy to break. Which had me thinking, and during my fight with the devil he mentioned that the Satan Leviathan was marching with her army towards us for a counterattack. He didn't say when, so I had to get here quickly to tell you." The other cadres sat up and looked at Isseith. Worry in their eyes was detectable. Azazel donned a serious expression, this causing him to use a little more strength in his arm that was around Isseith. "There's a Satan and army marching towards us, are you positive?" Azazel was looking at Isseith intensely. Isseith could feel his eyes burning through him. It's the only explanation as to why the defense was weak, and this came from him when he was still sane. "There is no doubt in my mind that they are marching towards us, but we cannot take them on until the city is captured." Isseith removed Azazel's arm off him. "Malpas and I will take our forces and continue to drive the devils out of here. Once that is complete, we should prepare defenses for the incoming army." Isseith stood up. "Hold up there, kiddo, we still haven't taken care of the Chimera. Barakiel, Shemazai and Kokabiel are still fighting it to a point. Most of the remaining garrison have been dealt with, the rest being captured for intel. From what I heard they are pushing it away until they can unleash their power in full. Then we should prepare a defense. The soldiers need time to recover from exhaustion. I bet your men need rest too. Take a few hours before moving out. I would rotate your men out with some in the reserves to keep them fresh." Isseith looked back at his father. "All right, Dad." Isseith was mad, but he had to keep his mind calm so that he could focus on what was soon to come. That's it for this part of the battle. Poor Hannibal, it's just not his day. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. First, previous ch5 of 13 next.